Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of What's Going On. I'm your host, Tom D'Ambra. This week, folks, we are going to continue with part 2 of a lecture by a gentleman from North Carolina by the name of John Anesworth. If you got to watch the program last week, I think you'll find this very interesting. And if you hadn't, what the subject is about is basically the Civil War and Reconstructionist era. You're going to discover that the reality does not match the perception that what we think of the Civil War and the reasons behind it. So I invite you to watch this program, sit back, take notes. I know you're going to find this very interesting and very startling, and we will see you on the end of the program. We thank you for watching.
We did, because there's this concept that we were under the Articles, we said, you know what, we don't like this, we're going to adopt the Constitution. And we just switched from one to the other. We just kind of amended it. It's not true. Once 9 secede from this becomes binding on only those 9. And not, once it's binding on them, those 9 are going to raise an army and go grab the other 4. It's government of right comes from consent, not force. I love Lincoln. He's going to force us into a free government. We're 2 states clearly out of the Union after they were in the Union. Yes, North Carolina and Rhode Island. Lincoln goes on. He says this: the Union is older than any of the states. And in fact, it created them as states. Originally, some dependent, notice there's not an IN in front of dependent, some dependent colonies made the Union, and in turn the Union threw off their old dependents, not independent, old dependents for them, and made them states, such as they are. Not one of them ever had a state constitution independent of the Union. Of course, it is not to be forgotten that all the new states framed their constitutions before they entered the Union, nevertheless depended upon and preparatory to coming into the Union. Is that double speak or what?
He writes like an attorney.
He can torn it very well.
Congress sit there and listen to it.
Okay, so let's see, the passions were there. And we say we can't understand this, but let's talk about the war in Iraq.
Yeah.
What's the legal justification to be in the war in Iraq?
None.
Weapons of mass destruction was what was sold to us. Were they there?
No.
So, why are we there? Did they pitch it to us? Have we been pitched wars?
Oh, to bring democracy to them.
Oh, yeah. Right.
We don't have to fear, but it's okay
To free the Iraqi people and give Muslims everything we got.
Yeah.
Pornography and gay rights and everything a Muslim
They
wants.
don't want it.
Okay, but again, let's go back to where I was. I forgot what I was... Oh, the Union's older than the states. 3 states, South Carolina, New York, and New Hampshire, had constitutions prior to the Second Continental Congress, starting to prepare for the Articles of Confederation. So, we were under the Continental Congress, and they were like, well, we kind of need to get a government together, so we can kind of organize, raise money for this Continental Army, do something, we got problems here. And so they proposed a form of government called the Articles of Confederation, June 12, 1776. So that's when the concept of a government for the Union was proposed. 3 states already had constitutions. Lincoln said none did. Okay? The Articles were actually created November 15th. So this is, hey, let's get a form of government. This is the date they're created. And then they were ratified in January of 1781. Okay, so 76 to 81.
Like 5 years.
You got 5 years here. Okay? 11 states ratified state constitutions prior to the creation and ratification of the Articles. So you had 3 before they were proposed, 11 more before they're actually created. Now let's just go back and read what Lincoln said. The Union is older than any of the states. And in fact, it created them as states. Originally, some dependent colonies made the Union, and in turn, North Carolina had a Declaration of Independence in 1775. We're a free and independent state. But he's saying, no, we're a dependent colony in 1775. We're in the Union. No one of them ever had a state constitution independent of the Union. What are the adjectives? What are the terms we ascribe to Abraham Lincoln? Honest.
Noble.
Noble.
Obfuscated.
That's what we in this room would say, yes.
Big ears and big
But that's not what our children are taught. Virtually every state declared itself a free and independent state in their constitutions. Because he kept saying these dependent colonies. He threw off their dependence. Well, Delaware said that they are a free and independent state in their constitution. Pennsylvania said that it shall henceforth be a free and independent state. Vermont said it therefore is absolutely necessary for the welfare and safety of the inhabitants of the state that it should be henceforth a free and independent state. Free and independent state. Free and independent state. How many people saw the word dependent in there? Well, let's just look through Abraham Lincoln's rose-colored glasses. Here's what he reads. Wait. I'm out of order. Yeah. Let me go back. Here's what's on the paper. Here's what Abraham Lincoln reads. That these states are free and independent states. Or maybe he's reading that they're free and codependent states upon the Union or something. He's not reading the words that are actually on the paper. The new states entering the Union considered themselves free and independent. Yes. Well, what about after the Union was framed? Well, maybe things changed and these are dependent entities. Constitution of Alabama, well, they said to mutually agree with each other to form ourselves into a free and independent state by the name of the state of Alabama. Free and independent. I don't see the word dependent anywhere. Is there any evidence to support Lincoln's position that the states considered themselves permanently dependent upon or codependent upon the Union? Because that's the argument he's making. The Union's older than the states. It created them as states. They were dependent. They get all their freedom and rights in a Union, not as a free and independent state.
That's why he was a lawyer.
Is Lincoln clearly stretching the truth by claiming that no state was ever free and independent, but instead was bound and obligated to adhere solely and permanently to the federal union with no lawful authority to voluntarily leave it?
Of course, that was lying.
He's stretching the truth. Did Vermont join the union? Did they vote to go into this under the Constitution, knowing that they would never be able to lawfully leave it, no matter how tyrannical it got? Once in, you can't get out. No, nothing could be further from the truth. Lincoln said this: the express pledge to each other, what the states pledged to each other, by each and all the original 13 in the Articles of Confederation, that the Union shall be perpetual, is most conclusive. What was the actual title of the Articles of Confederation? The Articles of Confederation and Perpetual Union. So, it's most conclusive that the Union shall be perpetual. It says it in the Articles of Confederation. Well, the Articles of Confederation, Perpetual Union, the term perpetual occurs 5 times in the Articles of Confederation, and it's in the title of the document. Can't deny it. Article 13 of the Article says this: and the Articles of this Confederation shall be inviolably observed by every state, and the Union shall be perpetual. You can't deny the words in there. You can't deny that's what they said. But, let's look at the other side. The term perpetual was dropped from the Constitution of the United States and appeared 0 times. The federal government and union created under the Articles of Confederation, in fact, was not perpetual and was seceded from. They said, this perpetual union, how many people want to leave it? Have a convention, you can go. Right over here. Was it perpetual? No, it wasn't perpetual. But he's using that argument that it was in that government as an argument for waging war against people that wanted to voluntarily leave of their own consent. Was the government operating under the Articles of Confederation and Perpetual Union perpetual? And the answer is no. Did the original 13 states formally withdraw from the Perpetual Union? Yes. Was the term perpetual in the Constitution of the government that Lincoln was sworn to support? Was he sworn to support the Articles of Confederation? Why is he citing the Articles of Confederation? His form of government doesn't have the word in it. We're not done with Lincoln yet. He keeps going. Much is said about the sovereignty of the states. But the word is not in the National Constitution, nor, as is believed, in any of the state constitutions. You know, much is said about sovereignty. State sovereignty. It's nowhere, he's saying. It's not in the national, it's not in the state. what's this lie these people are talking about? Well, let's research the word sovereignty. The Paris Peace Treaty, this is at the end of the Revolution, where the transfer of the title of the soil to the colonies was transferred from the crown to the people of the states. This is Article 1 of the Treaty of Paris. His Britannic Majesty acknowledges the said United States, and he names them one at a time, to be free, what's that word? Sovereign and independent, not dependent, states, and he treats them as such. Did the Crown of England recognize the states as independent and sovereign?
Yeah.
Individually, not as a body. That's an S on the end of states. Free, not a free and sovereign state, but free, sovereign, and independent states. Article of Confederation and Perpetual Union. Hey, Lincoln liked that one. Article 2 says each state retains its sovereignty. Well, why didn't he cite the articles on this one? Constitution of Massachusetts says you got to take this oath of office that Massachusetts is of right and ought to be a free, sovereign, independent state. He says the word's not in any of the constitutions. Article 4, the people of the Commonwealth have a sole and exclusive right of governing themselves as a free, sovereign, and independent state. So he's got sovereign and independent states in there. Now, article down here, the people inhabiting the territory formerly called the province of Massachusetts Bay do hereby solemnly mutually agree with each other to form for themselves into a free, sovereign, independent body politic or state. Vermont. Article 9, the representatives so chosen, and they shall have all the powers necessary for the legislation of a free and sovereign state. Lincoln says it's not in your Constitution, guys. Sorry. That was y'all are delusional over here, man. Y'all read like us Southerners do. Article 32. Now, here's a state that came in after the Union. Okay, so here's another one. Tennessee. Article 32. Blah, 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 contained within the charter limits of the state over which the people have a right of exercising sovereignty and right of soil. In Tennessee's constitution. So I got 3 constitutions already. Got 10% of the states at the time. And I didn't research them all. Those are just the ones I found looking them up. Federalist Papers. What are the Federalist Papers? Federalist Papers are when we were organized under the Articles of Confederation and wanted to go to the Constitution. The Federalist Papers were the editorials written in the New York papers by James Madison, John Jay, and Alexander Hamilton explaining what the legal ramifications of what this Constitution was, and the Federalist Papers are considered law to be cited. You can cite as law to interpret original intent of the Constitution.
But
Okay.
they were biased, and they were anti-federalist people.
I'm not going there. We're dealing with what we've got here. Federalist 39 says this: each state, in ratifying the Constitution, is considered as a sovereign body. Okay, again, Lincoln's saying sovereignty's nowhere. Well, it was in the Treaty of Paris, it's in state constitutions, it was in the Articles of Confederation, it's in the Federalist Papers. What kind of research is this lawyer doing? and is a sovereign body independent of all others and only to be bound by its own voluntary act. Is RSA telling tall tales yet again? Yes. Does he have more? Yes. The states have their status in the Union, and they have no other legal status. If they break from this, they can only do so against law and by revolution. So if they decide to voluntarily leave, they have no legal status out. They never had status out. He's making the argument. They never had a legal status outside the Union. Do the states ever have a legal status of free and independent? Granted by the Crown. Stated by each state. Stated by the Articles. Stated by the Federalist Papers. Is Abraham Lincoln rewriting American history?
Yes.
On the principles of what America is about? Did the Crown of Great Britain recognize legal status? I kind of got ahead of myself there. Lincoln was wrong again. Yep, he's wrong again. There's the man. Everyone bow down. How strangely will the tools of a tyrant pervert the plain meaning of words. I mean, were those words that I read that opposed? I mean, I'm giving the other side of what people are taught. I'm taking his words and let's research it. Is there veracity in what he has to say? Was there anything? Another argument he had that I didn't put in here. Abraham Lincoln said that Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution says that Congress is given the duty to guarantee to every state a Republican form of government. And they cannot obey that part of the Constitution if that state leaves the Union. We can't guarantee Vermont a Republican form of government if you leave the Union. That was in this thing too. I just didn't put it in there. It's a great little document. I recommend everybody read it. Honest Abe or Sophist Abe? Honest is morally upright, never cheating, lying, or breaking the law. Truthful or true, expressing or embodying the truth, presenting information in an impartial way. Is this Honest Abe? Or is it Sophist Abe? Subtly deceptive reasoning or argumentation, such an argument used to deceive. A lie told often enough becomes the truth. But Abraham Lincoln was honest. It's his reason, ethics, and justice that we want to embody in this country, isn't it? Isn't that what's going to happen, I think, in about a week?
Yep.
Glenn Beck said this, February 23, 2010, the founders made it look easy. George Washington, Honest Abe, they were men of honor. There's no way anybody is going to risk their lives, their fortunes, their sacred honor to follow a liar. Would have never worked. Restoring honor. At the foot of Abe Lincoln. In a couple weeks. You can be there. Now again, let me go back on this. I like Glenn Beck. Okay? He's doing more than anybody has in a long time at showing how much deception. But on his radio show, on his TV show, he habitually says he's giving Lincoln a pass. That he will not go towards any of this that I'm presenting. And if you say, hey, we have a sacred cow here, we've got a remedy, America's in shambles, and we got one big rock we're not going to look under. We're not looking under this one. We're going to look somewhere else. And if what's under this rock is the problem, can you ever get remedy? You can't. Mr. Beck needs to learn, and he may. We need to get information. We need to spread information. He's doing the best he can. I believe in the guy's honesty and integrity. Okay, but he's in a learning curve, and he hasn't learned everything.
He's behind the curve.
He's behind the curve. He's saying things I was saying 10, 15 years ago. Okay, let's look at the results of Lincoln's reason, logic, and justice. Let's just look at Lincoln's war. Let's just look at the little slide presentation of, remember, what's the function of government? To guarantee and secure the rights of the people, to make them free. And here's what he's doing to make the Southern people free. The function of government is to protect and secure the rights of all citizens. How well is Mr. Lincoln doing? People say this is great. This needed to be done. They're taught that. And this is brought to you by America's greatest, remember, this is America's greatest president. Always, on every poll, one or two, bam, the greatest president. This is the man. This is what he brought us. His reason, logic, and justice. Charleston, South Carolina, 1865. The government of the United States has any and all rights which they choose to enforce in war, to take their lives, their homes, their lands, their everything, because they cannot deny that war does exist there. And war is simply power unrestrained by constitution or compact. To the persistent secessionist, why death is mercy, and the quicker he or she is disposed of, the better. William Tecumseh Sherman, General. Everybody here, does anyone here not know who William Sherman is? I mean, people in the South know who he is. I just didn't know if all y'all knew who he is. I mean, do you agree with Sherman's Lincoln ethics and justice? There's Charleston, after Sherman went through. Waging war on civilian populations. Pretty noble.
Protection.
This isn't World War II, guys. This is brought to you by Abraham Lincoln to give us free government. Because we couldn't stand that stuff we had before. Atlanta. Sherman's chief engineer, O.M. Poe, was deeply disturbed by the killing of women and children during the shelling of Atlanta and expressed concerns to Sherman on several occasions. But Sherman responded only that such deaths were a beautiful sight because they would quicken a Union victory. At that time, it was also Sherman's policy to require male citizens to either take a loyalty oath or be shot. Sounds like government of right and consent to me, doesn't it? Agree with us or die. And you'll be free. If you agree with us, you're free.
Sounds like Islam.
In other words, swear your loyalty to Lincoln's political view and interpretation of the Constitution. Do you agree with Lincoln's political view and interpretation of the Constitution? You're required to do it or be shot back then. I begin to regard the death and mangling of a couple thousand men as a small affair, kind of morning dash. General Sherman to his wife. Nice love letters, correspondences this guy gets. How much more romantic can you get than that? Until we repopulate Georgia, it is useless for us to occupy it. But the utter destruction of its roads, houses, and people will cripple their military resources. I can make this march and make Georgia howl. And he did. The reason Sherman was eager to make Georgia howl, the people of Georgia actually thought they had a right to self-government. I bet the people of Vermont thought that too. But now you're wondering what happened. We're going to show it to you. Headquarters. This is a military order from Sherman to one of his generals. Cannot you send over about Fairmont and Adairsville, burn 10 or 12 houses of known secessionists, kill a few at random, and let them know it will be repeated every time a train is fired upon from Resaca to Kingston. Go ahead and kill a few at random. Burn a couple houses. War on the civilian population, an unarmed civilian population. Do you agree with his reason, ethics, and justice? Because this is the reason, ethics, and justice of America today. And we're trying to figure out what happened. Savannah. Fredericksburg. Columbia. Columbia was darn near burnt to the ground. Old lithograph they published in Harper's Weekly. The United States has the right and the power to penetrate to every part of the national domain. We will remove and destroy every obstacle, if need be, to take every life, every acre of land, every particle of property, everything that to us seems proper. William Sherman. This is what we did to our own people.
Did the Posse Comitatus Act come thereafter because of this?
No, because they liked this.
Well, it came after this.
But again, well, I actually don't even want to start discussing all that. Let's stick with this. Because the Posse Comitatus means nothing. The government was over... Let me just say this right now. I've kind of been hitting on, can you solve a problem if you don't know what's happened? Can you solve it? The issue is America broken today?
Yes.
No. Is America, I'm going to say another word, is America overthrown today?
Yes.
Is there a difference between broken and overthrown?
Yes.
Is there a different remedy for an overthrown government versus a broken one? A broken one, you elect new, you vote, you fix it, you do whatever with internally. If it's overthrown, it's like you got a totally different animal there. And I want you to think about that as we proceed through this commentary. We're in an enemy's country and I act accordingly. The war will soon assume a turn to extermination, not of soldiers alone. That's the least part of the trouble, but of the people. This is General Franz Halder. He was the German general in charge of the invasion of Russia. Do you agree with his reason, logic, and justice? Reason, ethics, and justice? Well, I'm fooling you. That was actually William Sherman's words. Halder didn't say it. That was one of our generals.
Again, he was one.
To his wife, yeah, he just wrote love letters. There's Mr. Sherman right there. Such individuals would rebel against a government so mild and just as ours was in peace. A punishment equal to death would not be unjustified. Now, how do we treat the memory of General Sherman, this great man? This guy that we just read some of his writings to his wife. We saw his work. Make monuments to him. This is right across the street from the White House. Sherman Square. Here's the Grand Army Plaza in New York City. Got a gold one of him. Make monuments of this guy. And of course, we know what they do with Lincoln. This is on the website. Learn North Carolina Digital History, Civil War and Reconstruction. And this is what they teach. For the North, the war produced a still greater hero in Abraham Lincoln, a man eager above all else to weld the Union together. Again, not by force and repression, but by warmth and generosity. What a warm, fuzzy guy. Was all this carnage for the purpose of freeing slaves or overthrowing the foundation of law and centralizing the power of government in Washington? Which one was it for?
The latter.
The latter, but we don't want to just say it, we want to prove it, don't we? What was the prize Lincoln and the radicals, the radical Republicans, in Congress were willing to cause such devastation for? I mean, we saw some huge devastation. The worst devastation in the history of this country. What was the biggest prize that would give the federal government virtually unlimited power? Isn't this the issue? Is the federal government controls every aspect of our lives today, right? What's the prize? How did they get it? Did they get it through our Social Security Act? Did they get it through incorporating the District of Columbia? I've never heard of anything more silly. They didn't do it like that. I believe the war prize was the nationalization of citizenship. Now, what does that mean? What's the does that sound like a lot? Let's read it. Let's go back to Federalist 39. Federalist 39 is James Madison saying, do we have a national government or do we have a federal government? Nowadays, most people think those are synonymous terms. National government, federal government, same thing. Federal government's a federation. National government is a federation of several, the Union, or a confederation. A national government is a one body of people. Isn't that what Lincoln was arguing? We're one body, one union. No state was ever out of the Union. There is no state sovereignty. They're all dependent. We're one. That's what he's arguing. James Madison is saying, well, what about citizenship? Is it national or is it federal? Is it a union or is it a nation of one? And he says this, the idea of a national government involves in it not only an authority over the individual citizens, but an indefinite supremacy over all persons and things, as far as they are objects of lawful government. Among a people consolidated into one nation, this supremacy is completely vested in the national legislature, Congress. In this relation, then, the proposed government cannot be deemed a national one, since this jurisdiction extends to certain enumerated objects only. He's saying this nation was not set up as a national government in regard to citizenship. Okay? But if you could nationalize citizenship, what kind of power would Washington get? Let's read it again. The idea of a national government involves in it not only an authority over the individual citizens, isn't that what we're railing against? But an indefinite supremacy over all persons and things. Can't they change your rights? They have an indefinite supremacy over your rights. What you can do, what you can't do, what you can say, what you can think, who you can talk to. Among a people consolidated in one nation, this supremacy is completely vested in the national legislature, Congress. So if Congress could nationalize citizenship, would they get total control and dissolve the Union? We're going to see if this happens. Again, I don't want to just say it happened. I'm not going to cobble together some thoughts and let you come to a conclusion or lead you to a conclusion. That's what a lot of people out there in this movement do. They put half thoughts out there and then they cobble them together and with a little bit of illogical stuff here and there that most people don't pay attention to and say, now here's the end product. We can't do that, people. We've got to, the truth is our weapon. We've got to know what happened so we can get our rights back. How many people have ever read The Objects of the War? People who've heard me before have seen this because this is what I do on a regular basis. Congressional Globe, July 20, I think it's July 25th, 1861. When did he give his special session to Congress? July 4th, 1861. So this is about 3 weeks later. Okay, so now Congress, right down here, is the object of the war. I'm going to make that bigger, and we're going to read it. Andrew Johnson of Tennessee proposed an amendment on the object of the war, and it is this, and this is what he proposed, and just so we can read it and go through it quicker. Resolved that the present deplorable civil war, so this is the object of the war. How many people have heard the war is about states' rights, it's about taxation, it's about slavery, it's about all this stuff? I'm going to tell you that it is, about all of those. But, how was it about slavery? How was it about states' rights? People say the war is about states' rights. Who wanted their states' rights? The South. So are they saying that the North, you people up here hated states' rights? Y'all hated y'all's individual states' rights. Y'all wanted to go to war and get rid of those nasty things, didn't you? I mean, when people say the war is about states' rights, was it about you guys hating your states' rights? No. We want to get rid of them? Hey, let's get an army. I want to join that cause because these things really suck up here. I hate these states' rights. They're terrible. I mean, it doesn't make sense. Resolved that the present deplorable civil war has been forced upon the country by disunionists of the southern states now in revolt against the constitutional government and in arms around the capital. That in this national emergency, Congress, banishing all feeling of passion or resentment, or mere resentment, will recollect only its duty to the whole country. That this war is not prosecuted upon our part in any spirit of oppression, nor for any purpose of conquest or subjugation, nor for the purpose of overthrowing or interfering with the rights or established institutions of the states, but to defend and maintain the supremacy of the Constitution and all laws made in pursuance thereof, and to preserve the Union with all the dignity, equality, and rights of the several states unimpaired. That as soon as these objects are accomplished, the war ought to cease. Well, let's break that down. I think I got to break. Nope. Excuse me. Break down right there. The object of the war was not for oppression, any purpose of conquest, any purpose of subjugation. It's not for conquest or subjugation. It's not for the purpose of overthrowing or interfering with the rights of the states. North fought to preserve states' rights. Because could they have gotten a militia, the militias up and the people up and volunteered to destroy their own states' rights? They couldn't have done it. And it's not for the purpose of overthrowing and interfering with the established institutions of those states, which was slavery. It's not to interfere with slavery. Now, is that what we're taught? The North officially fought to preserve states' rights and to preserve slavery. Didn't they have, remember, 30% of the slave states stayed in the North. Were they fighting to get rid of their slavery and their states' rights? No. It wasn't happening, people. The object of the war was to defend and maintain the supremacy of the Constitution and all laws made in pursuance thereof, and it was to preserve the Union with all the dignity, equality, and rights of the several states unimpaired. Now, that's a noble cause, isn't it? I mean, kind of. If you say that secession's a crime, you kind of start with a flawed foundation, it kind of makes sense. Let's do a little timeline. March, April 1861, Lincoln declares the 7 southern states' ordinances of secession null and void. Okay, that's the 7 southern states before April 15th. Their ordinances of secession are null and void, based upon the position that states cannot leave the Union. We saw his logic for that, right? He says, legally, you have no legal status outside the Union. You can't leave. Nothing like that was ever contemplated by the founders, is what he was saying. July of 1861, both houses of Congress passed resolutions clearly stating the object of the war is not for any purpose of conquest or subjugation. April to May 1865, the Confederate Army surrenders to overwhelming opposition. December of 1865, remember the object of the war is to preserve the Union. The southern states have never left the Union. And so when the war is over, are the southern states considered back in the Union? Well, December of 1865, the 11 previous Confederate states are considered back in the Union to the degree that they participate in the amending of the National Constitution abolishing slavery. Congress sent the 13th Amendment abolishing slavery to the southern states, and these are the dates they ratified it on. All these dates right here. North Carolina ratified it December 6, 1865. So North Carolina is considered back in the Union It's ratified. North Carolina ratified it on December 4th. The amendment was ratified on December 6th, 1865. Lincoln shot in April of 1865, so this is months after that. So, who does Congress send a proposed amendment to amend the Constitution? States, right? Did Congress recognize all these states as states by the sheer fact they sent them a proposed amendment to the Constitution and say, vote on this? Right? I mean, they didn't send them to Mexico and Canada. They sent them to these states, and they used those as, hey, these states ratify the 13th Amendment. Peace is declared a presidential proclamation on April 2nd, 1866. So 1861, the war. 65, the war is over. December 65, the southern states are considered back in the Union. April 1866, peace is declared. The war is over. April 1866, peace is declared. The 14th Amendment is proposed by the 39th Congress on June 13th, 1866. Again, I'm trying to keep a timeline going here. And is rejected by all southern states except Tennessee. Anybody ever heard of, not ex post facto law, what's the other one? The
Bill of Attainder.
Bill of Attainder.
Yeah.
There you go, thank you. Anybody know what a Bill of Attainder is? Bill of Attainder is basically a legislative act or a declaration that an entire group of people are guilty without due process of law. The Crown used to do that for people who they thought were in rebellion with them. All these people committed treason, they are outlaws, you can go kill them at will, type concept. It says no Bill of Attainder. You cannot convict anyone or a large group of people or any individual without due process of law. The Reconstruction Act is a Bill of Attainder. It just says your state government's null and void. No due process of law. You can't answer the charges. You can't answer anything. It's just your state's illegal. Doesn't exist. The people who participated in the war, they're all guilty of treason. They're not allowed to vote anymore. Can't vote. Bill of Attainder. The Reconstruction Act are based upon the principle of Congress' power to conquer and subjugate the southern states' form of government and citizenry. So basically, the object of the war is changed 2 years after the war is over and 1 year after peace is declared. Isn't that a good time to change the object of the war? Remember, the object of the war was not for any purpose of conquest. Reconstruction is based upon the principle of Congress' right to conquest. It's kind of nice to change the object of the war 2 years after it's over and after peace is declared. Well, I'm just talking about North Carolina because everyone wants to say that all these southern states left the Union so they could keep their slaves. That was the reason. We love slavery. North Carolina held an election on February 28, 1861 on whether to hold a convention on secession. Okay? Lincoln is inaugurated March 4th. So a week before Lincoln's inaugurated, North Carolina holds a statewide vote on whether we want to have a convention to discuss secession. The call for the convention was defeated by 651 votes. North Carolina decided to stay in the Union. This is a week before Lincoln's inaugurated. We took a vote. We're not leaving. We're staying in the Union. Citizens held the belief that the federal government could not force one state to wage war on another. That was a common belief back then. April 12, 1861, Fort Sumter is fired upon. April 15, 1861, Lincoln calls on North Carolina Governor John Ellis to provide 2 regiments of troops. War is inevitable, and North Carolina must decide whether to fight the North or the South. Let's just go over that. Abraham Lincoln called on Governor John Ellis to provide 2 regiments of troops to put down the rebellion to the seceded states. What did John Ellis reply? He says, I can be no party to this wicked violation of the laws of the country and to this war upon the liberties of a free people. You can get no troops from North Carolina. That's what North Carolina said. And we seceded on May the 20th, a month and a week after this.
Formal writing? Informal writing?
Held a convention and seceded. Remember Article 7 of the Constitution? You can hold a convention, change your form of government. That's what we did. We were taught the right way to look at the Civil War includes understanding Lincoln's sense of justice his logic, honesty, reason, ethics, and beliefs, which are the benchmark for social justice today.
Justice. Sounds like progressive.
Ah! Maybe we're missing a progressive. Peace is declared by Presidential Proclamation, April 2nd, 1866. And here it is, just to show it to you. I'm not going to read it just because of time. Believe me, trust me. Let's read the Reconstruction Acts. Here's the first Reconstruction Act. We're going to take a little excerpt out of it. And, well, let me just go back. Here's the very first sentence. Whereas no legal state governments or adequate protection of life property now exist in the rebel states of... And it lists all the southern states with the exception of Tennessee. Because Tennessee ratified the 14th Amendment. So it did not go through Reconstruction. It's the only southern state, only Confederate state that did not go through Reconstruction. And we're going to see why here in just a second. What they did, what Congress did, is they annulled the state of North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Mississippi. Said you have no government there. You have to have a new government. Oh, and by the way, all the people who used to participate in your government, they can't vote anymore. No conviction, no due process. They're just guilty. Bill of attainder. And then these new people, all free blacks can vote. All northerners who moved down there, they can vote. Anybody, we call them carpetbaggers, scalawags, and all the free blacks could vote. But all the people who were the posterity to the Constitution of the United States could not vote. And they had to form a new Constitution. They had to send this new Constitution to Washington. Washington had to approve it. And we're going to actually read the words here in just a second. We're going to say what I say here. And then once these states where Washington said, okay, we recognize your government and you have an election, then you have to have your legislative body come together. You have to bring up the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, and two things have to happen. One, you're required to pass it. And number two, not only that, it's required to become part of the national Constitution, and then at that point, you're allowed to have senators and be seated in Washington and have representation. Okay? Does that sound like the way to amend the Constitution? We're going to annul you because you didn't pass it, and you can't get in until you did. Okay. And be it further enacted that when the people of any one said rebel state shall form the Constitution of government in conformity with the Constitution of the United States in all respects, and when said state by a vote of its legislature elected under said Constitution shall have adopted the amendment to the Constitution of the United States proposed by the 39th Congress and known as Article 14, and when such article shall have become part of the Constitution of the United States, said state shall be declared entitled to representation in Congress and senators and representatives. Now, are you a state if you don't have representatives in Congress? You're not.
It's not a Republican form of government.
You're not represented. But you get to amend the Constitution, but you're not really a state. Do we have, like, conflicts of law going all over the place here? The president vetoes Reconstruction. Andrew Johnson. Now, what do we know about Andrew Johnson? His popularity. What do we know about this man?
He was impeached.
He was impeached.
I thought he did a lot of vetoes.
He did a lot of vetoes. How is he considered in ranking as far as good presidents?
Pretty low.
Always very low.
Absolutely.
He's one of the best.
I always ranked him high.
Now,
for his vetoes.
the history I know about him says that he believed in reconciliation with the South and did not want to take severe measures. Is that correct?
He decided to follow Lincoln's concept, but it doesn't really matter what they believed. Let's look at what they did. I like Andrew Johnson. I think Andrew Johnson was the last great president we had because he fought for the constitutional republic founded by the framers, and every president after that allowed it to go by and be trampled upon and get more powers based upon it.
Did you know that he was the only Supreme Court justice in the state on the state level to become president? He was a Supreme Court justice.
He was a tailor.
In Tennessee.
Was he a Supreme Court justice?
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't even know that. I knew he was a tailor and his wife taught him to read and write.
Supreme Court justice.
Never knew that. But anyway, Andrew Johnson, good guy. Let's read a little bit about. He vetoed all these acts that the radical Republicans, and this time the Republicans are the bad guys. The Democrats are the good guys. Because the Reconstruction Act went straight party line, just like health care. Republicans for Reconstruction, Democrats against it. Says another ground, this is his veto of the Reconstruction Acts. I think it's the third Reconstruction Act. He says another ground on which these Reconstruction Acts are attempted to be sustained is this: that these 10 states are conquered territory, that the constitutional relation in which they stood as states toward the federal government prior to the rebellion has given place to a new relation, that their territory is a conquered country, and their citizens a conquered people, and that in this new relation Congress can govern them by military power. Okay? Title, he says, is based upon conquest. What was the object of the war? Not for any purpose of conquest. But now, 3 years after the war is over, a year and a half after peace is declared, Congress is saying it's for conquest. He says this, and listen to these words carefully. A title of conquest stands on clear ground. It is a new title acquired by war. It applies only to territory. Is that word right there an important word? The title to the land? Conquest. What does conquest do? It changes the title of the land from one group of people to another group of people. Title of conquest stands on clear ground. It's a new title acquired by war. It applies only to territory. Who's claiming title over the southern states specifically right now?
DC.
Washington. We have title to it. He says another ground on which these Reconstruction Acts are attempted to be sustained is this: these 10 states are conquered territory. This is the President of the United States. This is the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. Could the armed forces have conquered the states legally, lawfully? Take your pick. No. Why? Congress passed a resolution saying the war is not for any purpose of conquest. Can the Commander-in-Chief of the military go out and use the military for something specifically against what Congress says he's allowed to do with it? He can't. So were the southern states conquered by arms between 1861 and 1865? Legally? No. There was no authority for the United States military to conquer them.
But in reality,
Peace is declared in 1866. 1867, Congress says, we think the war was for conquest. We're going to change the title. We're going to change who can vote in this state. And it might just change from state citizens to national citizens. Let's just see if that happens. He says this: there's not a foot of the land in any one of these 10 states which the United States holds by conquest. Reconstruction is passed over the President's vetoes. What was the purpose of the 14th Amendment? Was the 14th Amendment designed for the freed slaves? That's what we're taught. You got the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments are called the Negro Amendments. 13th Amendment abolishing slavery, the 14th Amendment giving freed slaves civil rights, and the 15th Amendment giving slaves the right to vote. So we're commonly told that the 14th Amendment was designed to give free slaves civil rights. That's what we're taught. Well, was the 14th Amendment designed to nationalize citizenship? Well, let's just go to some writings of the times. How many people ever heard of this guy, James G. Blaine? From Maine, radical Republican, loved Reconstruction, loved Lincoln, loved all this stuff, career politician, congressman during the war. He wrote a couple books. I own both of these two. 20 years of Congress, 1861 to 1881. My wife bought that in St. Johnsbury at the used bookstore when I was here the first time, like 12 years ago or so. I bought that book at the bookstore here. Or she did, for me. She thought I might be interested in it. Found some really good stuff in it. James G. Blaine says this. This is a speech that Blaine gave to a Republican mass meeting in Skowhegan, Maine on August 29th, 1866. Okay, so this is, remember it was proposed in June of 1866. Reconstruction isn't until 1867. Okay, so we're dealing with original intent, not like after it's passed, let's go back. He's explaining to the people of Maine what this 14th Amendment is for. He says, and in making this extension of citizenship, we are not confining the breadth and scope of our efforts to the Negro. it is for the white man as well. We intend to make citizenship national. Is that pretty clear? Now, that's just one source, or just one time he said it. But what does the 14th Amendment say? All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. It changed citizenship from being a citizen of a state, this nation being composed of citizens of the states, is what made this country up, to a United States citizen primarily. But let's just keep reading. James G. Blaine says this: as the vicious theory of states' rights had been constantly at enmity with the true spirit of nationality, the organic law of the Republic should be so amended that no standing room for the heresy would be left. Okay, so what did the Northern Farm Boys fight for? To preserve states' rights. But he's calling it a vicious theory that we've got to amend the Constitution so there will be no standing room for this theory of states' rights. No standing room for it would be left. Now, how many people out there are going and trying to get a 10th Amendment resolution passed in their states? 10th Amendment is states' rights amendment. States' rights are dead. You don't have them. You can't resurrect them by getting in a committee and getting your government and petitioning your government. You can't do it. States' rights are dead. As the vicious theory of states' rights had been constantly at enmity with the true spirit of nationality, the organic law of the Republic should be so amended that no standing room for the heresy of states' rights would be left. He wanted to amend the Constitution so there would be no states' rights. The issue is, did they do it? He says the first section of the Constitutional Amendment, which includes these invaluable provisions, is in fact a new charter of liberty to the citizens of the United States, is the utter destruction of the pestilent heresy of states' rights, which constantly menaced the prosperity and even the existence of the Republic, and is the formal bestowment of nationality upon the wise federal system, which was the outgrowth of our successful revolution against Great Britain. Okay, he says that it is the 14th Amendment is the utter destruction of the pestilent heresy of states' rights. This is a guy who loved the 14th Amendment. He helped draft the 14th Amendment. He pushed it. Do you think he knows what he's talking about? He says the purpose of it is to get rid of the pestilent heresy of states' rights. Now, if you don't believe we've lost states' rights, maybe you see we got them. I say we lost them. He's talking about these new state constitutions that they forced on us. All were ordained in the spirit of liberty. All prohibited the existence of any form of slavery, even though slavery was abolished in 1865 and these were forced on us in 1868. Kind of the timeline's a little bit out. And all heartily recognize the supreme sovereignty of the national government as having been indisputably established by the oath of rebellion, which was taken to confirm the adverse theory of states' rights. This is get rid of states' rights and recognize the supreme sovereignty of the national government. Are we seeing something here that we could get a little information on to where we can go somewhere with? Excuse me, that's rhetorical. I say yes. Its opening section, the 14th Amendment, settled all conflicts and contradictions on this question by a comprehensive declaration which defined national citizenship and gave to it precedence of the citizenship of a state. And it says this: all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the states wherein they reside. Listen to this. These pregnant words distinctly reverse the origin and character of American citizenship. Instead of a man being a citizen of the United States because he was a citizen of one of the states, he is now made a citizen of any state in which he might choose to reside because he was antecedently a citizen of the United States. The consequences that flowed from this radical change in the basis of citizenship were numerous and weighty. He's telling you, a change happened in your citizenship. You went from a state citizen to a national citizen. What did Federalist Paper 39 say if Washington could nationalize citizenship? They have an indefinite supremacy over all people. Isn't that what we're fighting today? Is nationalizing citizenship really that big of a deal? I say yes. Let's read Federalist 39 again. The idea of a national government involves in it an authority over the individual citizen and an indefinite supremacy over all persons and things. This supremacy is completely vested in the national legislature, Congress. Is this not the epitome of our problem today? They have total control over our money. We got to tell them how much we spend, how much we make, where we spend it, who we spend it with. They can do anything. They can tell us what we can believe and what we can't believe. This is our problem, people. It's not the Social Security Act. It's not the incorporation of the District of Columbia. It's not the Federal Reserve Act. It's not the Bilderbergers. They might be behind this stuff. Who cares? Here's a legal argument for you. You don't even have to say the word Bilderberg. On several occasions, the constitutionality of Reconstruction Acts were attempted to be adjudicated. That means go before we can get a ruling in court. Every attempt has been met with obstruction of justice. Let's go through the fight for Reconstruction, the legal fight, the judicial challenges to Reconstruction. This is Georgia v. Stanton. This is Edwin Stanton, Secretary of War, State of Georgia, saying, hey, you can't sit there and send this army down here and annul us in times of peace. The war's been over for a couple of years. Supreme Court. And what does the Federalist Papers say the Supreme Court's function of the Supreme Court's for? It's supposed to be a bulwark between the people and an over-encroaching government to keep the government at bay and the rights of the people secure. Okay, that's the function of the Supreme Court. We're supposed to have a system of checks and balances. The Supreme Court is supposed to be one of the checks and balances. They're supposed to always rule on behalf of the rights of the people. And they ruled this. A bill to restrain the defendants, which is the United States government, who represent the executive authority of the government, from carrying into execution certain acts of Congress, inasmuch as such execution would annul and totally abolish the existing state government of Georgia, is not within the jurisdiction of this court. Does that sound like a bulwark to help to protect the rights of the people? They just want, hey, are these acts constitutional? Well, just because it's going to annul and abolish it, we can't rule on it. And there's some nuances, legal nuances, which I don't have time to get into. Ex parte McCardle. I highly recommend everyone read ex parte or do research on ex parte McCardle. Ex parte McCardle. McCardle was a newspaperman from Mississippi, and he didn't like Reconstruction. He wrote about it in an editorial of his newspaper. He was arrested for saying he was against Reconstruction. Who defends actions against the United States government? It's supposed to, well,
People are afraid.
Yeah, I know you're afraid to answer. It's the Attorney General, right? The Attorney General, I'm sorry about that. The Attorney General is supposed to defend all actions against the federal government, right? That's the way it works. Well, Attorney General Henry Stanberg and Andrew Johnson, President of the United States, said the Reconstruction Acts are unconstitutional. We're not going to defend them. And this was actually written up in the New York Times. The case of Colonel W.H. McCardle, arguments of Judge Black and Senator Trumbull. It says, in the course of debate, Mr. Attorney General Stanberg defined his position. He said that a case had been laid before the President in which a military commission had sentenced a person to death. The question had been propounded to him by the President whether the condemnation and sentence were legal. He had, in accordance with his convictions, answered that they were illegal and void. So he's saying that these actions to convict him in this military tribunal under the Reconstruction Acts are illegal and void, and had advised the President not to approve them. This being his opinion, he could not, of course, take the other side of the question. You know, he's saying that this is illegal and void, giving that opinion to the President, and now he's got to defend it as being lawful and legal and constitutional. He says, I can't do it. He says, therefore, he declined to argue it here. He had left it to be argued to those who believed in the doctrine, and he had given notice to General Grant in consequence of which other counsel had been employed. So he told General Grant, head of the military, go hire a lawyer. You want to defend Reconstruction? You arrested him. Go hire a lawyer. The U.S. government's not defending it. The Attorney General's not defending it. How many times has this ever happened in the history of this country?
Not enough.
Let's look at some of the players here. David Dudley Field defended McCardle, along with someone I'm going to show you here in a second also. Lyman Trumbull is the one that argued for the constitutionality of Reconstruction. This is the attorney that was hired. Who is Lyman Trumbull? Senator from Illinois. A lot of good senators come from Illinois, by the way. I think Lincoln and Obama and Trumbull. And then, this is just a note of interest. Stephen Field, who was a justice on the Supreme Court, and David Dudley Field are brothers. But, I don't think any nepotism stuff, weirdness was going on there. But these are just some of the players. This is also one of the players, Jeremiah Black. Jeremiah Black was defended McCardle. Well, who was Jeremiah Black? Chief Justice of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court from 1851 to 55. United States Attorney General under James Buchanan. United States Secretary of State from 1860 to 61. Is this a heavy hitter, a guy knowledgeable in the law? He's defending McCardle that the Reconstruction Acts are unconstitutional, along with David Dudley Field, who was another heavy hitter, and they're going against a senator of the United States who just loves Reconstruction and thinks we ought to nationalize citizenship. Okay? So he argued for McCardle also. And he said this. A state election was going on which was superintended entirely by the Army, which by means of bayonets drove one set of voters to the polls and drove another away from them. The whole thing was accomplished by naked terrorism. And when an unarmed and peaceable man expressed his opposition to such proceedings through his own newspaper, he was told he should not do so and was ordered into custody. Which of the two parties was guilty of intimidation? The accused or the accuser? It was said McCardle hindered Reconstruction because he wrote an editorial about it, and he was arrested for it. Congress desired that a certain constitution or form of government should be adopted and submitted to the people for their decision on it. Or it was submitted to a portion only of the people of Mississippi. The act of Congress made a show for the expression of approbation or disapprobation, approval or disapproval. Vote, do you want this Constitution or you don't want the Constitution? McCardle was not among those who were in favor of that Constitution. This was said to be hindering Reconstruction, the commission of a crime which there was a right to punish. So, again, his editorial against it was a crime. No judge who had a clear comprehension of his duty would ask a man to plead to a tissue of absurdities like that. Yet, if the trial of McCardle had gone on before a military board, he would not have had the slightest chance of escape, but would have been convicted. Military commissions never disappoint the expectations of those who order them. Daniel Webster said years ago that military commissions were always organized to convict. He ventured to say that in 9 cases out of 10, military commissions committed outrages on justice and law. Military men, as a general thing, know nothing of judicial duties. Okay? So, he's sitting there saying it's absurd to sit there and say he's going to be hung. Because he wrote an article against that Constitution. Okay? Let's meet Lincoln's friend Lyman Trumbull, who argued on the other side. We're told that the 14th Amendment is for all these people that love the black man and they want to give the black man civil rights and they were just these benign, just wonderful, diversity-loving individuals. Well, let's look at Lyman Trumbull. This is a guy who's defending Reconstruction. Let's look at some of his quotes. Or let's just look at one of them. He says this: "There is a very strong aversion in the West, I know it is so in my state, against having free Negroes among us. Our people want nothing to do with the Negro." So this is a guy who's defending the civil rights legislation. Sounds like a contradiction to me. But Lyman Trumbull says this, in ex parte, in the closing arguments. He never defended the constitutionality of Reconstruction. Let's read what he did defend. He says, "I shall commence what I have to say by denying the jurisdiction of the Circuit Court under the Act of February 5th, 1867 to hear this case, or cause. And if I establish that proposition, of course this court cannot entertain jurisdiction of it." He's challenging the jurisdiction, not the legitimacy. He says, "I have gone I have now gone substantially over the ground which I intended to occupy. The propositions which I have endeavored to maintain are first, that this court has no jurisdiction of the case, because the act of February 5th, 1867 did not authorize the circuit court to take jurisdiction of it. So I'm arguing jurisdiction because of this act of February 5th, 1867. Remember that act. We're going to get to it in just a second. There's an act. Anytime you go before the Supreme Court, you have to have an avenue to get there. You know, there has to be you have to have standing or some legal reason for the Supreme Court to be able to take jurisdiction. Everyone here knows that Lincoln suspended the writ of habeas corpus and said people can't get there for certain reasons. Well, the suspension of habeas corpus was really good until the war was over, and now you have all these Northerners going down south, and the Southerners are throwing them in jail, and there's no writ of habeas corpus. So Congress passed an act of the February 5th, 1867, saying, we're going to open up the door for habeas corpus now because we got a bunch of Union men in the South that need to appeal up to the Supreme Court. And that's what McCardle used. You know, Congress only wanted it for the Northern men. Well, the Southern guy used it, and it wasn't going real well. Well, in the McCardle case, the Supreme Court accepted jurisdiction, and the entire case was argued. And both sides rested, and I gave you part of what their arguments were. Was it looking well for Lyman Trumbull at this point? The answer is no. So what did Lyman Trumbull do? Remember, who is he? He's a senator from Illinois. Well, he goes to the Senate and proposes legislation that will take away the Supreme Court's jurisdiction to rule on the case. What he wants to do is change that act of February 5th, 1867 and shut the loophole, shut the door, so the McCardle case cannot be ruled upon. Okay? And he says this. Remember, he gave the oral argument in this case. This is about a week later. He says, in my judgment, there is no such great importance to be attached to it, creating this new law that's going to take away jurisdiction of some cases that might come before the Supreme Court. He says, in my judgment, there is no such great importance to be attached to it. It is a bill of very little importance. In my judgment, and I wish to say to the senator from Maryland that the Supreme Court has not decided that any case is pending before it under the Act of February 5th, 1867. No such decision has been made, nor do I believe any such decision would ever be made. So, there's no case before the Supreme Court under the Act of February 5th, 1867. But he argued one a week earlier. He says, now there is no such case as is pending in the Supreme Court, and there has been no such case pending in the Supreme Court. Now this is coming out of the Congressional Globe. This is what he's saying on the Senate floor. Well, Mr. Doolittle, Democrat from Wisconsin, comes up and he says this, Mr. President, my honorable friend from Illinois seems to think that there is no importance in this measure, that it affects nothing and nobody, that there is no case pending in the Supreme Court which this act will affect, that it is a mistake and a delusion on our part to suppose that there is any such case there under the law of 1867. Well, sir, if he be correct in this, why the great haste in pressing the bill? What does it mean? Sir, I apprehend that the honorable senator from Illinois is altogether mistaken in his view, which he now presents, that this is a very important measure, and that there is a very important case pending in the Supreme Court under the act which is now proposed to repeal. The honorable senator himself as counsel in that court. He's calling him out. Man, guy, come on, guy. You kind of pull one over on us here. If I am correctly informed, and with other counsel have made a motion to dismiss a case pending in the Supreme Court. Remember, that's what he's doing, challenging jurisdiction, dismiss. He says, or alleged to be pending under the act, and the court refused to dismiss it. They heard the argument. They didn't dismiss it. He says, we all know, the whole world knows that this case of McCardle is pending in the Supreme Court, brought up on appeal under the Act of 1867 from the Circuit Court of Mississippi, and that case has been argued, and argued by eminent counsel, and that it is pending. It is important because the case involves the constitutionality of the Reconstruction Act. It involves the constitutionality of those acts which have been passed by Congress. If there be no such case before the court, why does the honorable senator desire to pass this bill and take away jurisdiction of a case which does not exist? Mr. President, the truth is, and we may as well look it square in the face, it is because men know that these acts will be decided to be unconstitutional. That is the reason why they desire to take away from the court the consideration of the question. Then you have another representative, come in. This is George Washington Woodard. Who is he? He's a Democrat, member of the United States House of Representatives, 67 to 71, Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania from 52 to 63, and the Chief Justice of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court from 1863 to 67, just the year before. So here's another heavy hitter. Supreme Court Justice, Chief Justice. Sir, in former times, candid and wise legislatures were most anxious that questionable legislation should be brought to judicial tests at the earliest possible moment. If anybody doubts the constitutionality of an enactment for which I vote, while I may have the honor of a seat on the floor, I will facilitate the judicial investigation of the question by all the means in my power. In other words, I vote for something, let's put it to the test, as whether it's constitutional or not, because that's what this country, are we a nation of laws or are we a nation of men? He says, but it was rumored that the Supreme Court were likely to declare the Reconstruction laws unconstitutional. And this bill was reported and passed, says the gentleman from Iowa, for the purpose of preventing that. Sir, if this legislation means anything, it means just this: that the President shall not exercise the constitutional functions of his office, the judges shall not exercise the constitutional powers vested in them, but the legislative will shall be supreme, which I say is a repeal of the Constitution of the United States and a consolidation of all the political power of this government into the hands of a legislative oligarchy to be wielded I know not by whom. And just a summation here is, while the case was under advisement, Congress passed an act. This is just a summation from a resource, a legal text. It says, while the case was under advisement, Congress passed an act taking away the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court as defined by the Act of February 1867 in cases of habeas corpus, and the appeal was therefore dismissed for want of jurisdiction. McCardle was thereupon discharged, and no further attempt was made to test the constitutionality of the Reconstruction Act. That right there, people, is your answer.
Hasn't been challenged. Huh?
There's been no test upon the constitutionality of Reconstruction and nationalization of citizenship. I want to find people who think that this is a valid legal argument, that we have a right to take up. Not only a right, a duty and an obligation to take up this cause of the nationalization of citizenship. Not the Bilderbergers. Not all this other stuff. The Reconstruction Acts were unconstitutional. They annulled states. They nationalized citizenship. They overthrew the foundations of what this nation was founded on. In 1867, you have a lot of other arguments out there to say, all of our problems started in 1932, 33. They didn't, people. Is this the overthrow of government? Or is this just, it's a little broken, we got to fix it? This is the overthrow of government. Who are we the people? It just depends on the meaning of the term, we the people. That's my shot at humor, just a joke and laugh. Who are we the people? Who was one of the ramrods of Reconstruction? Who was the main ramrod of Reconstruction? A gentleman by the name of Thaddeus Stevens out of Pennsylvania. This gentleman right here. Pleasant guy. Looks like me sometimes, right?
Looks like Jack Powell.
Exactly. Who said that?
Okay.
He was born in Danville, Vermont. They got a big plaque up for him.
Well, let's just talk about him a little bit. Speech on Reconstruction, January 3rd, 1867. Remember, he hates the president. The president's vetoing the Reconstruction Acts. He's the leader of Reconstruction. He's the leader of the impeachment process. He says, if the president is commander-in-chief, Congress is his commander. And God willing, he shall obey. He and his minions shall learn that this is not a government of kings and satraps, but a government of the people, and that Congress is the people. So every time you look at those words right there, put it in perspective, people. That's Congress. Ain't talking about you. Because who chose the government of North Carolina? The people of North Carolina or Congress?
Congress.
So, this isn't just a flippant statement. This is what they believe. Do the North Carolina, remember I talked about body politics at the very beginning? You know, under the different flags? Do the North Carolina Constitution of 1776 and 1868 represent the same body politic? I'm going to say the same thing about Vermont. Does the Constitution of Vermont, the original Constitution, and the Constitution today have the same body politic? Originally, North Carolina Constitution, December 18, 1776, is wherefore it is necessary that government should be established in this state. Therefore, we, the representatives of the freemen of North Carolina, freemen is a legal status recognized under English law. Article 7, that all freemen at the age of 21, blah, 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 shall be allowed to vote, that all freemen age of 21, blah, 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 can vote in the House of Commons. And the Constitution of North Carolina, 1868, who can vote? Every person born in the United States. Sound like the freemen of North Carolina to you? Two different body politics, two different political beliefs. Anybody born in the United States, and every person been nationalized, 18 years of age, possessing qualifications set out in this article shall be entitled to vote. Is this the same body politic?
No.
The preamble to the Constitution is ordained for who? Ourselves and who? Our posterity. Is this the posterity of the people of North Carolina that entered the Union? No. We have an overthrow of government. It's clear. Reconstruction moves forward in North Carolina. Okay, what happened in 1867, 1868? This is a military order removing the government of North Carolina. This is July 1st, 1868. War's over in 65. 66, peace is declared. Why is North Carolina surrendering its government, or its government is being removed by a military order in 1868? Let's just read all this. This letter right here is a surrender letter to the state of North Carolina, where we surrendered our government to the United States government by Jonathan Worth. He's the one that surrendered it to William Woods Holden. William Woods Holden holds the honorable distinction of, he was the one handed the government by the United States Congress. He holds the distinction of being the only governor ever impeached in the state of North Carolina. Jonathan Worth was a little Quaker guy, about 5'2". You can see not much of a man. But when two states called the state of North Carolina have entered the American Union. One is the 12th state, one is the 39th state. He's the first governor of the 39th state. He's the last governor of the 12th state. The date is July 1st, 1868. Let's read this document. Let's just read an extract. Well, let's just read it. It says, yesterday morning I was verbally notified by Chief Justice Pearson that in obedience to a telegram from General Canby, he would today at 10 a.m. administer to you the oaths required preliminary to your entering upon the discharge of duties of civil governor of the state, and that thereupon you would demand possession of my office. I intimated to the judge my opinion that such proceeding was premature, even under the Reconstruction legislation of Congress, and that I should probably decline to surrender the office to you. What's that word right there?
Surrender.
Surrender the office to you. At sundown yesterday evening, I received from Colonel Williams, Commandant of this military post, an extract from General Order Number 120 of General Canby as follows. And I just showed you that military order that he received, which is on the previous page. And this is an excerpt from it. And it says, to facilitate the organization of the what? New state government. Not the reorganization of an old state, but the organization of a new state government. The following appointments are made. To be governor of North Carolina, W.W. Holden. Governor Jonathan Worth, removed. To take effect July 1st, 1868, on the meeting of the General Assembly of North Carolina. And he says this. He says, I do not recognize the validity of the late election on which you and those cooperating with you claim to be invested with the civil government of the state. You have no evidence of your election, save the certificate of a Major General of the United States Army. I regard all of you as, in effect, appointees of the military power of the United States, and not as deriving your powers from the consent of those you claim to govern. Knowing, however, that you are backed by military force here, which I could not resist if I would, I do not deem it necessary to offer a futile opposition, but vacate the office without the ceremony of actual eviction, offering no further opposition than this, my protest. I would submit to actual expulsion in order to bring before the Supreme Court of the United States the question as to the constitutionality of the legislation on which you claim to be the rightful governor of the state, if the past action of that tribunal furnished any hope of a speedy trial. Again, I surrender the office to you under what I deem military duress, without stopping, as the occasion would well justify, to comment upon the singular coincidence that the present state government is surrendered, as without legality, to him whose own official sanction but 3 years ago declared it valid. Remember, it was valid in 1865 after the war's over. It was valid in 1866 when Congress sent the proposed 14th Amendment. And then they said, no, we don't want the 14th Amendment. We don't want to nationalize citizenship. We're not voting for that. They said, well, you're annulled. You're going to get a new Constitution until such time as you pass the nationalization of citizenship. It was coerced. It was forced. Let's get into some legal terms here. Government de facto is a government of fact. A government actually exercising power and control as opposed to the true and lawful government. A government not established according to the Constitution of the nation, or not lawfully entitled to recognition or supremacy, but which has nevertheless supplanted or displaced the government de jure. A government deemed unlawful or deemed wrongful or unjust, which nevertheless receives presently habitual obedience from the bulk of the community. And a government de jure, a government of right, the true and lawful government, a government established according to the Constitution of the nation and lawfully entitled to recognition and supremacy, and the administration of the nation, but which is actually cut off from power or control. A government deemed unlawful or deemed rightful, a government deemed lawful or deemed rightful or just, which nevertheless has been supplanted or displaced. That is to say, which receives not presently, although it received formerly, habitual obedience from the bulk of the community. We're dealing with the de facto government and the de jure government, or de jure, whichever, if you want to get real proper. I like de jure, it's just southern. We have a government out there. The issue is whether it is put in place lawfully or whether it follows the Constitution. Because all those people there swear an oath to the Constitution. And I don't really care to hear arguments on, well, I'm not going to go there. I'll be nice. Okay, again, North Carolina. North Carolina, we've had two flags. We have this flag, which is the one they fly now, and we have this one, which was the original flag in North Carolina. This one is composed of state citizens. This one is composed of national citizens. This is the 12th state. This is the 39th state. I live in North Carolina. You can do the same thing here in Vermont. Find out when your body politic was changed by force. Which was, if you recognize the 14th Amendment, the Reconstruction Acts as being lawful, because if Congress has the authority to conquer one state in times of peace, do they have that authority on all states? And did they exercise that authority? They nationalized citizenship on you guys, just like they did us. But they convinced y'all and us that our forefathers in the South were terrible, awful people, and this was necessary and the logical conclusion to the end of the war. And it's up to us to get the knowledge it takes to get our freedom back, because they're not going to give it to us. So let's do a small recap. The objectives of the Civil War, as stated by Congress. July of 1861 is not for conquest, not for subjugation. It's to preserve the dignity, equality, and rights of the several states. After the Civil War, as stated by Congress in 1866 and 1867. It is for conquest. It is for subjugation. And it is to annul the dignity, equality, and rights of the several states. Let's just put them side by side and see if we get an equal mark. The object of the Civil War, stated by Congress. Not for conquest, for conquest. Not for subjugation, for subjugation. This is all sunny. Oh, it's great. But that's what they did over there with this object. They changed that after the war was over. You heard Blaine. They're getting rid of that pestilent heresy called states' rights. Is that what the northern people fought for? Washington spit on the graves of all those people that took up arms to fight to preserve states' rights. And what are we going to do about it? I mean, are we talking about the same war, or are we talking about two different wars with two different objectives? Never think of Reconstruction and the Civil War in the same vein. They want you to believe that the Reconstruction Acts are the logical conclusion to the end of the war. Of course they were conquered territory. Hey, you lost. Get over it. Come on. Don't you know? Quit fighting the Civil War. It's over. Well, which war? I got two different objects here. Which one are you saying I'm fighting? I'm actually fighting for the Northern cause. Well, for what was said in Congress, not what Lincoln proposed. To preserve the Union with all the dignity, equality, and rights of the several states unimpaired, which means you don't nationalize their citizenship. And do we want to get state citizenship back? I do. My goal is to get state citizenship back with a legal argument. And do you think we can formulate a legal argument out of what we've seen today where you can exercise your right not to recognize fraud, coercion, and force as being legally binding? Is fraud, coercion, and force legally binding? It's not. Ohio, what did the northern states do with this information? Did this just go under the radar? Did I just grab a bunch of information and kind of cobble it together and make a fancy little story? No. Well, let's just look at this. The Democratic State Convention assembled in Columbus, Ohio, January 8th. This is 1868. The Committee on Resolutions reported the following, which were unanimously adopted. That the states which lately attempted to secede are still states in the Union and have been recognized as such by every department of the government. That being thus in the Union, they stand on equal footing with their sister states, with equal rights. That it was a thing unknown to the Constitution that Congress had the power to deprive a state of reserved rights and reduce it to a territorial condition. That therefore the exclusion by Congress of all representation from 10 states, the proposed exclusion from the next presidential election, and reduction to territories are unconstitutional, revolutionary, and despotic measures destructive to the rights of those states and also to every other state in the Union, and part of a plan to nullify the Constitution, virtually overthrow state governments and erect despotisms on their ruins, and establish a tyrannical minority over a majority of the American people.
I'm going to join the Democrats.
Well, they flip-flop. They go back and forth. Okay, but is this going unnoticed? This is the Democratic Party platform. State of Ohio. Connecticut. At their Democratic Party platform, they passed this resolution, that those lately in insurrection against the federal government, having laid down their arms and fully resumed their duties as citizens of the United States, there's no obstacle in the way of the harmonious working of our Republican institutions, save the factitious course of a mutilated Congress, who have inaugurated a new revolution and are determined to rule the country in violation of the Constitution and to establish their wild and fanatical will as a substitute for the Union framed by the fathers of the Republic. Connecticut. Maine.
What's the date?
This is 1868. 1867, 1868. It's in that time frame, depending on what date that state held its Democratic Party platform. This came out of the Annual Encyclopedia of Important Events of 1867, is the book this came out of. Okay, Maine, at their June 25th, 1867, said this, that our last Congress was without precedent in its utter disregard of the Constitution and the rights of the people under it. All conservative pledges, which during the war were made by both branches of Congress, by the President and his cabinet, is what that's supposed to say, and by our leading generals, were cast aside and disregarded. Remember the object of the war? He's saying all these pledges, they're disregarded, cast aside. And the voice of the people, speaking through the minority, was stifled on questions of the most momentous interest, and which overturned the fundamental principles of Republican government. Been overturned, people. New Hampshire, that all propositions which contemplate directly or indirectly the subversion of the executive or judicial branches of the government or the annihilation of sovereign states are revolutionary and treasonable and ought to be resisted by all men who are true to the Union and the Constitution. Massachusetts, each state in the Union is free, sovereign, independent. Well, that's not what Lincoln said. and entitled to exercise and enjoy every power, jurisdiction, or right which is not expressly delegated to the general government in the Constitution of the United States. That those members of Congress who have passed laws outside of and in defiance of the Constitution for the purpose of subordinating the civil to the military power have trifled with the safeguards of justice, liberty, and peace, and are guilty of perjury and usurpation. Let's go to George Washington in his farewell address. He said this: if, in the opinion of the people, the distribution or modification of the constitutional powers be in any particular wrong, let it be corrected by amendment in the way which the Constitution designates. But let there be no change by usurpation. For though this, in one instance, may be the instrument of good, it is the customary weapon by which free governments are destroyed. Because there are people who say the 14th Amendment was necessary, and the ends justify the means. Or the means justify the ends. Give me one generation of youth and I'll transform the world. How many generations have they had? And what are they doing to our country? And our children are leading the fight against us now. Now, I just want to have a little fun. We all know about the Lincoln Memorial. You can make any man a god if you take selective words. Let's just pretend that these words of his are engraved on the Lincoln Memorial and see if the people would have and these are his words. See if people would have a different view of the man. Because the words that they have on the Lincoln Memorial are the Gettysburg Address and his second inaugural address, which he read a month and a week before he died. But let's just get a picture of the whole man. What he said before that time. My paramount object in this struggle is to save the Union. It is not either to save or to destroy slavery. But if I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it. If I could save it by freeing some and leaving others alone, I would also do that. What I do about slavery and the colored race, I do because I believe it helps save the Union. August 22nd, 1866. If that were engraved on the Lincoln Memorial, would people have maybe a slightly different view of the man?
Yeah.
I did.
Maybe this. Those who nominated and elected me did so with full knowledge that I had made this and many similar declarations and never recanted them. That the maintenance and violation of the rights of the state, and especially the right of each state to order and control its own domestic institutions, talking about slavery, according to its own judgment exclusively, is essential to the balance of power on which the perfection and endurance of our political fabric depend, and we denounce the lawless invasion by armed force of the soil of any state or territory, no matter what pretext, as among the gravest of crimes. He said that in his first inaugural address. And then what did he go out and do?
Yeah. Why?
That. Anybody ever read the words that are right at the bottom of his feet? He says, I have no purpose, directly or indirectly, to interfere with the institution of slavery in the states where it exists. I believe I have no lawful right to do so and have no inclination to do so. First inaugural address, March 4th, 1861. Oh,
Good call.
and written on the side, I understand the proposed amendment to the Constitution to the effect, this is what I read before about the 13th Amendment, where he, an amendment, proposed amendment that would make slavery permanent and irrevocable. I have no problem with it.
Where's that written?
Oh, it's on his left side. If you go to
Really?
no, it's not. None of these are actually written on it. I just figured, let's put his words up there. Let's put his words on it. And say, would it change our view of him if you sat there and put a balance on it? He says here, I have not nor have ever been in favor of bringing about in any way the social and political equality of the white and black races. That I am not, nor ever have been in favor of making voters or jurors out of Negroes, nor of qualifying them to hold office, nor to intermarry with white people. And I will say in addition to this, that there is a physical difference between the white and black races, which I believe will forever forbid the two races living together on terms of social and political equality. And inasmuch as they cannot so live, while they do remain together, there must be the position of superior and inferior. And I, as much as any other man, am in favor of having the superior position assigned to the white race.
Oh, that's a racist. That's a racist.
1858, that's Lincoln-Douglas debates, if you want to go look up the Lincoln-Douglas debates.
You also favor
Oh.
exportation to Africa.
Or to Brazil, or to any place that would take them in the Caribbean. Africa was pretty far away, and he actually looked at a lot of places in the Caribbean and South America. Now, if that were printed on the side, would people have a different view of what this man is? Are we given a one-sided, glossy, rosy picture of this man?
Yes, distorted.
There should be a pamphleteer down in D.C. handing this thing out.
The largest propaganda tool used to maintain America's toppling from its foundation is the deification of Lincoln and the justification of both the war and Reconstruction. Largest propaganda tools we've got is how they do that and get us to believe it. Because if we don't know this, you know what? We look in all sorts of other directions of what the problem is. And that's what we've been doing for years and years. I'm trying to get people to stop it.
Well, I think you'd have to agree that was a very interesting lecture by Mr. Ainsworth. And you know, folks, the thing you have to come to the conclusion here is that the real winner of the Civil War was not the North. The real winner of the Civil War was Washington, D.C., because basically the states at that point lost their sovereignty. In the future, we're going to get into the amendments to the Constitution pre-Civil War, and then what took place post-Civil War with regards to the 14th Amendment, the 13th, and so forth. And I think you're going to see a great disparity between the ideals of the first amendments and then the post-Civil War era. Because, folks, you have to ask yourself, this is called the Reconstructionist era. You have to ask yourself, excuse me, just what did they reconstruct? And what they reconstructed was our form of government. So, as always, we thank you very, very much for watching, and we will, obviously, in the following weeks, we're going to present these programs to you. We're going to break this down, and you can come to the determinations yourself as to what took place during the Reconstructionist era. And we're also going to get into a series of codes called the Lieber Codes, written by a gentleman by the name of Francis Lieber, who was quite instrumental in taking us down this path that we currently find ourselves in. And the other thing we're going to look into is we're going to ask ourselves, what happened to Andrew Johnson? Why was it that Andrew Johnson was impeached? Now, I know Mr. Ainsworth covered some of that in his lecture, but we're going to get into that in more depth and detail, and I think you're going to be surprised by the information that we're going to present to you. So, as always, we are very thankful that you take the time from your busy day to watch our program. We hope you enjoyed it and found the information not only startling but awakening. And as always, we remind you that your government is your responsibility. Thank you for watching.